Hi everybody and welcome to this short free video on the EMO diet. So what's that? Essentially what I'm going to be talking about is how our emotions and thoughts affect our digestion. So people come into me all the time and say, oh, I'm on the best diet, I'm on keto or paleo or macro, micro, all these different diets that are out there. I'm eating organic, clean, I'm cutting out the sugars and the gluten and taking my supplements, my prebiotics, my probiotics, but I still have terrible digestion. So what's going on there? So what we need to be looking at is that what you eat is, of course, very important, but unless your body is in a position to actually deal with that incoming nutrition, then it's not necessarily going to be accessible to you and can cause problems. So what we're looking at here is the emotional context in which you are eating. So I'm going to dive into a little more detail of that. So what do we need for digestion to work? So in our digestive tract, that runs from our mouth all the way down to the stomach, through 30 feet of intestine and out the other end is our digestive tract. And at various points on that journey, there are certain enzymes and secretions that need to be produced that help to break the food down. The saliva in the mouth, the acid in the stomach, and so on as it goes down the system. We also need the motility of the gut to be online. This is the contractions that the gut lining makes to push the food through. We also need the walls, the lining of the gut. The walls of the gut decide what is allowed in and what is kept out, and those need to be in absorption mode where the right ingredients can get in. So for all those things to be online, the body needs to be in a certain state. And this state is mediated by our nervous system. So the nervous system is the body's kind of wiring system that sends messages all around the body. And we're going to be looking at a particular branch of the nervous system that's called the autonomic nervous system. This is basically the body's autopilot. So it deals with all the systems that run beneath the level of our consciousness. We don't have to tell our heart to beat. We don't have to tell ourselves to breathe in a sort of normal resting breathing state. We don't have to tell our digestive system to work. These things run on autopilot, and it's the autonomic nervous system that kind of mediates those processes. So that autonomic nervous system, it has two divisions. It has the sympathetic branch and the parasympathetic branch. You might have heard of these terms. The sympathetic branch is also known as the fight or flight system. It's what mobilizes us to react and respond to certain situations, but it's a spectrum, right? It's also the system that just helps us wake up in the morning and get on with our day and say, right, I've got to get in the car and go to work. So it's just a system of mobilization. But at the far end of that scale lives anxiety, right, and fear and all the responses that go with essentially the body being under attack. The opposing system is the parasympathetic system, and this is also known as rest and digest. There's a clue in that, right? So this is the system where the body is under no threat at all, so all normal systems can go about their business and things like growth and repair can take place. So when we're in our sympathetic dominant state, and bear in mind we're never purely in one or the other, there's always a little dance that goes on between the two. But when we're getting up sort of the more high end of the sympathetic system, then a lot of the growth and repair elements that go with the parasympathetic state are taken offline. So essentially the body is looking at energy resources, and when we are under attack and we've got to mount a response, we need to divert all our energy resources to fighting this predator or whatever it might be. So what happens in that situation is that the body will switch off all non-essential activities. Now, digestion is actually biologically very expensive. So in terms of our battery life, it takes quite a lot of our overall power. So when we're under threat, we want to divert the energy resources that digestion would be using to deal with the imminent situation. So digestion gets switched off when we're in a sympathetic dominant state. It's only when we get back into our parasympathetic kind of chill out mode that digestion gets switched back on. So here's a clue, right? So if you are eating when you're in a more sympathetic dominant state, all the things we talked about, the gastric secretions that help to break down the food, they're offline. The gut motility that moves the stuff through the gut, that's offline. The walls of the gut that normally absorb the nutrients, they're shut down. So we're not getting any of the benefits from the food that we're eating, but more than that, the food that we are eating is going to just sit in the gut because it's not moving. And what happens to kind of vegetable materials when they sit and don't move? They're going to start to rot, right? They start to ferment in our gut, release gases, and that can lead to abdominal discomfort, bloating, even gas as well. And if we're in a really extreme sympathetic state, the body can even just pull the chain on all of that and just evacuate the system. So now we can start to see that whatever we're putting into the system, whether it's beautifully nutritious or not so good food, if the system is offline, it's going to be causing problems. So not only are we getting that fermentation system that can lead to bloating and distension, but we're also getting increased inflammation because it's all just starting to turn into a bit of a chemical mess in the gut. Inflammatory chemicals in the gut are known to travel to the brain and affect our anxiety levels. So here we start to get ourselves into a self-perpetuating loop. If you were stressed when you were eating, you're more likely to increase gut inflammation, which in turn can drive anxiety. So we start to get into this vicious cycle, which is really not conducive either to good digestion or to our overall emotional health. So it means that we need to be very, very mindful about the emotional state in which we are eating. If we're too far up that sympathetic end of the scale, and as I say, this doesn't necessarily mean anxiety in its full-blown sense. It could just be distracted, busy, eating on the run, right? That's a real recipe for disaster in the gut because if we're busy and resources are being diverted to running to our next appointment or whatever it might be, then we're not going to be have as much available energy for digestion. So we really need to treat our meal times or any time that we're eating as little sacred rituals where we're really mindful about bringing that parasympathetic state online in order that the gut is open and ready to receive the food. So if you're preparing a meal, be really mindful about it. Think about the ingredients that you're preparing. Think about the goodness, the medicine that they're bringing into you, being grateful for that. And then as you sit down to eat, really make sure you open and prepare the gut. A good way to do this is doing some breath work, doing some deep abdominal breathing. The movement of the diaphragm when we breathe is a big part of massaging the digestive tract and actually getting it open for business. So preparing, if you think back to, I say back to the old days, some people still practice it today, but saying grace before a meal, if you take away the religious connotations of that, it was just a way to stop and go, thank you for the food. And what that's doing is opening up that parasympathetic system, having everyone just calm, have a moment of calm before you eat. Then as you eat, make sure you're chewing the food mindfully. The action of chewing is what helps to trigger the release of some of those gastric secretions that are going to help break down the food. chewing 20 times before you swallow is a good practice to make sure that you've given the saliva in the mouth the time to break down the food to a certain extent before it gets to the next part of the system. This is a beautifully designed system that takes the food through various stages of digestion. But if we're just swallowing it down after one chew, then we've missed out a big part of that digestive process that's going to compromise things as they get further down the chain. So chewing mindfully, eating slowly, and then giving yourself some time at the end of the meal to let the digestive system do the work. Digestion doesn't really happen until we finished eating, right? So if you're just eating and then running, that's no good either. You also need to be very mindful about not multitasking when you're eating. Even things as simple as don't watch the news when you're eating. You don't want anything that's going to make your mind go, oh gosh, what a terrible disaster has happened somewhere across the world that I've never even been to. But I'm now going to go into a sympathetic state worrying about it when I'm trying to eat. Don't be checking your emails or taking calls when you're eating. Clean that environment out. Make it a sacred time that is like taking medicine. In for your body. So no distractions, and don't even allow yourself to let those mind monkeys come in. Oh, I've got to run off and do that. Don't be running your checklist and agenda for the rest of the day whilst you're trying to eat. Also be mindful about who you're eating with. One of the worst things I find with some of the people I work with is business dinners, right? They say, oh, I have to eat with my boss or in a meeting and I'm just so stressed out. And then I feel, have terrible digestive problems afterwards. So again, we can train ourselves to buffer the system and to keep it open and online, even in the face of all sorts of things going on around us. We are in control of that after all, but that's quite difficult. That's kind of advanced level. In the meantime, if you can avoid eating for a meeting, try and make a meeting outside of food times. But even if that's not possible, just be mindful of what you choose. Don't pick the heavy pasta dish if you're around people that tend to trigger you. Go for a light salad and then get your full nutrition at a different time when you're on your own and not being irritated by those around you. So it's just really planning ahead and making sure that you're taking time to allow that parasympathetic system to be dominant whenever you are receiving food. And I always say my favorite line for this is, otherwise, it doesn't matter what you're eating, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. Whatever you're putting into your mouth is going to end up as very expensive gut compost, and it's going to cause you problems. So it's not just what you eat, it's the emotional context in which you eat. So I hope that's been enlightening for you and given you maybe some food for thought, if you'll pardon the pun, about how you're constructing your eating schedule. And if you're interested in learning more about anxiety and how that affects digestion, plus all other systems in the body, such as our immune system and our general health, then do check out my course, Taming the Anxious Mind, which is a much more comprehensive course that really takes you into the biology of all these systems, plus gives you strategies for how to manage your anxiety and how to find that elasticity and control within the dance between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, because it's very achievable. You just need the skills to know how. So in the meantime, thank you for checking out this free video, and I wish you very good digestive health.